This is Dan Dicks here reporting for Press for Truth. The Satanic Temple is going to be offering a religious education program at the Edgewood Elementary School in Ohio. Here is their press release. The Satanic Temple unveils a new release time religious instruction program. The Satanic Temple has announced the launch of a new religious education program, Hellions Academy of Independent Learning, or HAIL, as a response to the recent growth of similar Christian release time religious instruction programs. These programs allow students with parental permission to leave campus for religious instruction for 1 hour each week. The Satanic Temple's new program is scheduled to launch on November 15th in the Northern York County School District in Pennsylvania. So this program has now been running for 3 or 4 months. And Donald Trump is already being blamed for the rise of Satanism in schools, as the leader of the church has actually said they are not devil worshippers. The emergence of the Satanic Temple, spreading its teachings to young children, has been blamed on decisions made under the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump. The Satanic Temple has offered new religious release programs for pupils at Edgewood Elementary School in Ohio. These satanic programs in question are put on once a month by the Satanic Temple, named the Hellions Academy of Independent Learning, with the very eerie abbreviation of HAIL. Pupils on the program will be able to participate once a month, and the program lead claims that it will allow children to learn about values such as empathy, compassion, and justice, in a fun environment free of religious pressure or coercion. June Everett, the program director, revealed how most people react upon the discovery of the Satanic Temple in the scheme. When they hear it, it's initially shocking. They automatically think evil and awful things. We are not devil worshippers. We are non-theistic Satanists. So what on earth does it mean to be a non-theistic Satanist? Well, what that means is that they do not believe in an almighty creator. They do not believe in God. They don't believe in a devil or even Satan. They, in fact, put all of their trust in their faith and their beliefs in themselves. Now, the problem that I have with that is it's incredibly contradictory if they are going to teach about morals such as empathy, compassion, and justice. Because if there is no God, if there's no mind prior to the human mind, then that means that obviously it's the human mind that defines what is empathy and compassion and justice. And obviously, my mind might define it differently than your mind. You're not right, you're not wrong, I'm not right, I'm not wrong. It's all relative. And it ultimately, that means it's all essentially meaningless. So there's a major contradiction that I see here. And in fact, if Satanists were to be intellectually honest, I think they would see a lot of other major contradictions with their belief system. And I'll go through a few of these today to make the case for God that is going to be hard to dismiss. Number one, if there is no God, well, that means that nothing produced everything. The sun and the moons and the stars and this planet and humans and birds and puppies and, food and music and the majesty of the human eyeball, the miracle of birth, all these things were produced from nothing. And interestingly enough, scientists used to believe that the universe was eternal, but we eventually learned that it in fact is not. The universe does have a beginning. They call it the Big Bang. And even Einstein himself had to abandon his atheism when he learned that the Big Bang was real, because anything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning. Therefore, the universe has a cause. So is it more plausible? Is it more rational for me to believe the first few words of the Bible, in the beginning God created everything? Or is it more rational and plausible to believe in the beginning nothing created everything? Again, this is a stretch of mental gymnastics that you have to do to imagine the scientific impossibility that everything came from nothing. Second point, if there is no God, that means that randomness produces fine-tuning. The universe is absolutely phenomenal to the point that it is fine-tuned when you consider the position of the sun in relation to the earth. If the sun was just a little bit closer, we would all be completely fried. If it was just a little bit further away, we would all freeze to death. But it's in such a perfect way so as to perfectly ripen your tomatoes and to give you that lovely tan you might have right now. Again, this type of fine-tuning cannot simply come about by random chance. That is ludicrous if you believe so. Third point, if there is no God, you have to believe that chaos produces information. So if I'm walking down the beach and we see a nice pattern of ripples in the sand that were created by the waves, and we could say, look at that, isn't that nice how the waves created that ripple in the sand? And then we continue walking down the beach, and all of a sudden we see Johnny loves Jenny 2025 with a heart and an arrow through it written in the sand. That demands intelligence. But for the atheists, they would suggest, well, if there's enough time involved, if billions and billions of years are involved, then yeah, eventually the waves could create that. A cognitive a sentence in English with English letters and numbers and symbols in a cohesive, comprehensive sentence. Again, that is absolutely ludicrous if you think so. Now, you consider the amount of information that is contained within the DNA of a cell. The DNA of a cell has more information than an entire encyclopedia set that wouldn't even fit on the shelves in your house. Never mind Johnny loves Jenny. You times that by 1 trillion, and that's the amount of jam-packed information in the DNA we have in our cells. So to think that that kind of information can come about randomly, purely through chaos, like the letters on the beach, is again absolutely ludicrous and nonsensical to believe that. Fourthly, if there is no God, that means that the unconscious produces the conscious. It means that the unrational produces the rational, that reason comes from non-reason. None of these things are logical whatsoever. It's completely nonsensical and illogical. And I think perhaps the reason why Satanists and atheists tend to go down this path is because they're not looking for God. Much like how a criminal is not looking for the police. They're not interested in this authoritative figure telling them what they can and can't do with their lives. So I think that's essentially the major problem and the huge contradiction that I see within atheism and aka Satanism, Satanists who are atheists, is first of all, they're not intellectually consistent when they talk about empathy and compassion and justice. These are just figments of the imagination if there is no such thing as God. And if they want to be consistent in their thinking, they have to follow that to its logical conclusion. And also, all these points I pointed out that, the scientific impossibility that nothing can't produce something. And, 100% in my experience, you never see, for example, non-life produce life. You never see, the animate come from the inanimate. Like a rock, this table is not going to produce life. 100% of the time in our experience here on this earth have we never seen such a thing. So again, it's major mental gymnastics to, try to convince yourself that there is no creator. And like I said, most people are not looking for that creator, much like how the criminals don't want to look for the police. They don't want anybody, any kind of authoritative figure telling them how to live their lives. So I just wanted to bring all of this to your attention, and I also wanted to leave you with a speech that I gave around 8 years ago now, 7 or 8 years ago. This was when I was invited to speak at a conference in Acapulco, Mexico, in front of around 500 anarchists and atheists and libertarian-minded people who are working towards, a futuristic utopian society that we would all like to see. And I had to tell this crowd of 500 anarchists and atheists that without God in the picture here, all you're going to be left with is absolute chaos and disorder if you're going to try to bring about some sort of, libertarian utopia purely, coming from, man himself. This is the problem I have with atheists and Satanism and the libertarian movement in general, is that when you leave God out of the picture, you're going to be left with an absolute mess. So I want to leave you with that one today, guys. Maybe you've seen this speech I've given before, but maybe you haven't. So I figured today was a good time to play that one for you. Guys, if you do appreciate my efforts to continuously bring you this type of information, please don't forget to check me out here at pressfortruth.ca/donate if you appreciate my efforts to do so. You can do PayPal or Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. You can send an e-transfer to Dan at pressfortruth.ca, or you can send stuff to my P.O. box, guys. Links for all of this are located in the description below. Thank you so much to everybody who does take 1 minute today to support my efforts to bring you this information here at Press for Truth. Without further ado, guys, here's a little speech I gave to a crowd of about 500 atheists and anarchists to tell them that without God in the picture, it's absolutely pointless. The speech is titled, "The Truth About the Endgame." Check it out. Hello, everybody. Welcome back from the break. For anybody who might not be familiar with who I am, my name is Dan Dicks, and I run an independent media group based out of Vancouver called Press for Truth. And this is actually my 4th Anarchapulco experience. I've been coming to this since the very beginning. And during that time, my understandings of the philosophies of anarchism have evolved in those 4 years. But so too has the state, the system, recognized this awakening that is happening, and they are now scrambling to form a blueprint for the New World Order, a communistic blueprint. And from what I can tell, it seems like Canada is being used as the experimental grounds for this, for building this New World Order. So today I'm going to provide a few examples of how Canada is being used to build this New World Order and their vision of a secularist, communistic New World Order utopia. So if we're going to talk about the state of Canada, we need to start with the head, and that is Justin Trudeau. He's very, very different from Donald Trump in many ways. He's similar in the sense that he's really more of a celebrity than a politician. But where they differ is in being politically correct. They are polar opposites. Justin Trudeau identifies as a feminist. He's actually the largest promoter of the LGBT, LMNOQP community and the gender rights advocacy groups. And you may recall, I don't know if you heard, just a few weeks ago, the Canadian government changed the lyrics of the national anthem, and they removed the part where it says, "In all our sons command," to "in all of us command," to be more gender inclusive. So that's what we're dealing with up there. I don't know if you heard him a few days ago. Somebody at a town hall made the comment that we need to do things for mankind, and he said, "Oh, excuse me, ma'am, you should use the term people kind in order to be more gender inclusive." So that's what we're dealing with there. And they've even gone to the extent of introducing a bill called Bill C-16, which would criminalize, make it illegal for you to misuse somebody's preferred gender pronoun. So if a man wants to identify as a woman, and you refer to him as a he instead of a her, well, under Bill C-16, you could be charged with a hate crime. And if that wasn't bad enough, in Ontario, the largest province in Canada, under Kathleen Wynne, who happens to be a lesbian, she promotes Bill 89, which would give child protection services the ability to take your child away from you if you refuse to recognize the preferred gender of your own child. And speaking of children, Justin Trudeau is actually one of the, as a feminist, he professes to be a Christian, yet he is the biggest promoter of abortion as being a woman's right to do what she will with her body, but that's in direct contrast to his own faith. So you must be asking, what in the world is going on there in Canada? It almost seems like social justice warrior ideologies have infiltrated the political system, and their ideas are starting to permeate throughout society there. And it's this next generation with their trigger warnings and safe spaces who are going to be the police and the lawyers and the judges. So what kind of a world are they going to be bringing to the West? Well, I'm already seeing a leftist alliance with Islam happening in Canada. You can't be critical of Islam right now in Canada. Under Motion 103, they have something now referred to as Islamophobia. And I've said this a lot of times, Islamophobia is really a nonsensical term because it implies an irrational fear of something. But there's really nothing irrational about rejecting a culture and a religion that's at odds with our Western Christian standards and values here. So, if you're critical of Sharia law, hate crime. If you are critical of Justin Trudeau's immigration policies and his new integration program to integrate ISIS fighters back into Canadian society, well, you're Islamophobic. And if you're anything like me and you produce video content that points out just how ridiculous all this is and how much nonsense it is, well, you are branded as a white supremacist, a racist, or maybe even a fascist. It was not long ago I went to a rally in Vancouver. It was actually a protest where about 12 or 13 guys were planning on showing up in solidarity with the protesters in the United States who were trying to protect the American Confederate statues. You may remember that whole debate. Wouldn't you know it, about 4,000 counter-protesters showed up to this rally to try to drown out these guys' messages of hate. And they managed to do it in a good way because these guys didn't show up, and it turned into a huge leftist alliance with Islam type of rally. And at one point, I got there, and there was a native lady on the stage giving a speech, and she started to talk about how it was the white man who destroyed her people. And she literally said, quote, "The white man raped my entire family and is solely responsible for the destruction of my people." And I made the comment, and I just said, I thought this is an anti-racist rally. And all of a sudden, a friend of mine reiterated my statements, echoed what I said. All of a sudden, we were surrounded. They all started pointing their fingers and saying, "Nazis go home, racists go home," because we dared to point out the hypocrisy in their ideology on the left. But it's not just the left. I think this is a false left-right paradigm that we have to be aware of here, because democracy is really just an insidious form of communism. And that's not going to change. And democratic states run counter to human nature. So we got to ask, how are we going to move forward here, changing the world to make it a better place? And I think it's really important to understand the past when trying to figure out what's going on in the present. So I want to read to you a quote that I found from the famed author, historian, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was a survivor of communism. And this is what he had to say. "As a survivor of the communist Holocaust, I'm horrified to witness how my beloved America, my adopted country, is gradually being transformed into a secularist and atheistic utopia, where communist ideals are glorified and promoted, while Judeo-Christian values and morality are ridiculed and increasingly eradicated from public and social consciousness of our nation. Under the decades-long assault and militant radicalism of many so-called liberal and progressive elites, God has been progressively erased from our public and educational institutions, to be replaced with all manner of delusion, perversion, corruption, violence, decadence, and insanity. It's no coincidence that as Marxist ideologies and secularist principles engulf the culture and pervert mainstream thinking, individual freedoms and liberties are rapidly disappearing. As a consequence, Americans feel increasingly more powerless and subjugated by some of the most radical and hypocritical, least democratic, and characterless individuals our society has ever produced. Those of us who have experienced and witnessed firsthand the atrocities and the terror of communism understand fully well why such evil takes root and how it grows and deceives, and the kind of hell it will ultimately unleash on the innocent and the faithful. Godlessness is always the first step towards tyranny and oppression. More than half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of older people offer the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen Russia. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Since then, I've spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our revolution, and in the process, I've read hundreds of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and have already contributed 8 volumes of my own towards the effort of clearing away the rubble left by that upheaval. But if I were to ask today to formulate as consciously as possible the main cause of the ruinous revolution that swallowed up some 60 million of our people, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. And I read that to you today, not to preach in any means, but I merely want to point out the fact that governments have conditioned us into a philosophical, materialist society that is devoid of any kind of religious truth. It doesn't even enter the debate, even though it's as real and serious as science and history itself. So I think we really need to consider who is it that inspires us when we want to change the world. Because whether we like this or not, everybody here has an archetypal type of hero to which you look up to. And you may emulate that person in behavior, probably on a subconscious level. For a lot of people in this room, it could be somebody like a Murray Rothbard, or a Ludwig von Mises, or Ron Paul, or Jeff Berwick, and that's great. For guys like Trudeau and Trump, it's probably like Hitler or Lucifer or something like that, I don't know. But for some people, and maybe even some of the people in this room, despite the ridicule they may get, when you emulate behavior, some people may follow the teachings of Christ. And if you happen to find yourself in that camp, I would say congratulations, because that means you're being truthful to yourself, your friends, your family, and your community. And I said it's not my intention to preach here today, obviously, but I am going to bring up the big bad B word, and amongst some anyways, and no, I'm not talking about Bilderberg, I am talking about the Bible, but I wanted to present something to you that presented itself to me when I opened myself up to it. Just in doing research for this talk, I came across that Alexander Solzhenitsyn quote, and he's talking about the revolution, communism, how it plays in with God. And I literally just cracked open the Bible, I looked down, I started reading, and this is what it said. Avoid foolish and ignorant disputes, knowing that they generate strife. And a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient, in humility, correcting those who are in opposition to God. Perhaps will grant them repentance, so that they may know the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape the snares of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. And from such people turn away. For it is this sort who creep into households and make captives of gullible women loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And that's where I see society today, really. Always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of that truth. And what is this truth? Why do we need to press for truth, as it were? Well, I feel now it is my mission to inform you that unless the West rediscovers Christ, who he was, what he came here to do, and the fact that he's the very foundation of our civilization, especially in the midst of this Islamification of the West, well, unless we rediscover that tradition, I think the freedom movement and the liberty movement is going to be prevented from truly reaching the liberty that it needs to, because without Christ you're missing the full spectrum of that archetypal hero equation when it comes to how to conduct oneself properly. Because it's not all about just abolishing the state, which I am all for, but it is actually about changing yourself, being the change you wish to see in the world, as it were. And I think that doesn't necessarily happen up here, but I think it has to happen in here. So that's the challenge today. I would like for you guys I'm going to challenge you that when you leave this room, you analyze yourself. Who is it in your life who maybe you have as an archetypal hero, maybe on a subconscious level, somebody you look up to and you emulate in behavior, and try to assess, is that something that's positive and good? Is it encouraging to me, my friends, my family, and my community? When I first met Jeff Berwick, it was in 2014 at a Bitcoin conference in Toronto, and I spent a considerable amount of time with him, and I told him everything that I believed in, and he said, Dan, you know what, man? You, my friend, are an anarchist, and you don't even know it yet. And I said, you know what, Jeff, I think you're right, because I was under the impression that as an anarchist, as a Christian, you can't be an anarchist, because the whole no ruler thing. And for the Christian, they obviously have a ruler. And Jeff said, but that's where you are mistaken, my friend. Nobody has violated the non-aggression principle in that mutual contract. This is a mutually agreed upon contract with one-on-one personal relationship. Therefore, you can reconnect with your Creator and have a personal relationship as a principled anarchist. And I said, that's great, I'm sold. And so I've been on it ever since. So that's the challenge, folks. I would just say, look into yourself and make sure, question that archetypal hero to which you look up to. And hopefully, if we do that, we can start building this place towards something that's not going to represent Canada and the example that they are now trying to set for the world, but we can actually start to slow that process down and maybe even stop it one day. So I certainly intend to continue to press for truth, as it were, and I hope you guys will join me. Thank you. We all want truth. The truth will set you free.